Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Katy podcast. And as most of you know by now, my mission in this podcast is to really help you identify where your greatness lies and where the business greatness lies in terms of law firms, financial institutions, and big organizations, and how you can bring that flavor through as a brand. And the reason I do this is because everyone has a different version of this and people aren't quite sure. So my guests bring an astute education and a way of doing things. And I only bring my guests on when they inspire me. And I was just telling somebody that the other day. I said, I haven't had a guest on my podcast in a while. And my team said to me, well, why not? And I said, well, they have to inspire me. So we are back with Juan Zuniga, managing partner of Rimon, which is a global law firm. And this is the third time Juan's on my podcast because Juan inspires me times three. And I'm hoping, I know actually, I don't need to hope that you will inspire my audience. Welcome, Juan. Good to have you back again.
Thank you. And thanks for having me back. It's nice to be here.
My pleasure. Juan, what I love most about you, besides the fact that you have this brilliance to you and your pedigree and all that, which you can, remind my audience about, that you're so easy to be around. And by that, I mean, it's just like, I haven't talked to you probably, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years, but we just pick right back up and it's comfortable. And I have a feeling you're like that with everyone. You put everyone at ease and make them comfortable. And that's not the point of the podcast, but sometimes I think it really is, right? Who we are is how we bring the flavor of law to life and why we establish ourselves in a certain place and achieve certain results and get things running. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. I noted that right away when we got on. It's just comfortable being with you, and that's such a gift to the world, really. If we can make people comfortable, we can make clients comfortable, and we can make the practice of law more comfortable. Amen.
Well, I think that's true to a certain degree. I don't know that it's always true. I mean, I think everybody at some point, suffers from imposter syndrome. And when you're in that space, you're not inside your true self. And so you will come off as not being comfortable. And I think if you're like a younger lawyer still trying to figure out who you are and what this profession is about, you can give off vibes. I know that I did when I was a younger lawyer that I didn't always feel comfortable. And, when you're not comfortable, you don't project as well. And then the other thing that I'd say is some people have told me I'm scary. And I don't know why, because I don't think of myself as like a mean or an angry or a bad person, but some people just think I'm intimidating for whatever reason. So
have
you
you
never know.
have you
It's always, go
why?
ahead.
Have you asked them why?
Well, I think some people are, you use the word pedigree in reference to me. And I think some people may feel uncomfortable around certain pedigree, right? People who went to a certain school or are in a particular profession. They don't feel comfortable around someone with that kind of background. And so from their perspective, they might identify you as scary or arrogant or conceited, just because of who they perceive you to be, right? It takes both sides, the speaker and the listener, to be able to feel comfortable, if you will.
Through that, and then that's not about you at all. That's about them.
Right,
It always is.
right,
Yeah, I got you though. I
right.
understand. I get it. And you said something, and I don't want to get too sidetracked, but it's so relevant. You said younger lawyers don't know who they are. I have found that even much more senior lawyers are still trying to figure out who they are because as people we're trying to figure out who we are and starting to
Yeah,
shake us up. So I just had a conversation this morning with somebody who I used to work for, and he's very, very senior in the firm. And I said to him, I said, my gosh, you really figured out who you are? And he said, yes, certain life circumstances put us there. And it was so different talking to him. I'm a different person too, but I think people come into that understanding in different ways. I just think because of who you are and what your title is, this is a true testament to good leadership, effective leadership, because at that level, with whatever the pedigree, because you don't walk around with where you went to law school across your chest.
Yeah, yeah.
So people haven't done
I
the
walk.
research, but they know who you are and what you do. So if you can bring that natural essence of who you are, that's an inspiring leader that people want to please, want to serve in a healthy way, and want to be around and learn from. So perhaps that was my point, but what you said is certainly part of the conversation. So
Yeah.
can you fill in my audience on whatever aspect of your background you'd like to share with us, and how you got to where you are and exactly what you do there? And it's much better in your words than mine.
Uh, Thank you. I'll give you the abbreviated version, but I think there's this sort of two-tiered lesson that I draw from the story, my little origin story. And one is that the path to your future or your future success or whatever you're aiming towards is not necessarily linear, right? It can take lots of twists and turns. But the other thing that I've been focusing a lot on is, playing the long game, keeping your eye on the prize, knowing where you want to go, because at least you may not necessarily hit the objective, the target that you're striving for, but you know where you want to go, as opposed to be sort of like, kicked around by circumstances or the weather or whatever, right? Um, so my story, essentially begins. I'm a kid from Southern California, went to public school, both Mexican and American background, and talking about pedigree, I was incredibly fortunate to be able to be admitted to Harvard College in the early 80s as a kid who came out of public school in the second largest school district in the US. And so I also ended up going back to Harvard for law school, late 80s, mid 90s. Spent about the first 15 years of my career laboring in, big law, prestigious law firms. Again, sort of following a career trajectory that was conventional, if you want to call it that, for purposes of what we were told to expect coming out of law school and going into some of the biggest law firms in the country. And yet, I got to be honest, I tried to be the good soldier. I really, really sincerely tried really, really hard to do what it took at that time, and to some degree what it takes today, to advance your career in that context. Eventually, though, it stalled out for me for a variety of reasons. And there was a point, maybe 13, 14 years into my career, where I realized I wasn't really happy where I was or what I was doing. And once you have that conversation with yourself, if you're willing to be honest, you have to make changes. And the change that I didn't want to make was to go from one big law firm to another again. I really wanted something that was different. So what I ended up doing was starting a boutique law practice in 2007. I wanted something that reflected the value add in the practice that I brought to my clients. My practice being primarily cross-border real estate investment between the US and Latin America, of which there's not a dime a dozen lawyers doing that. And so I formed at the time what I called the cross-border law group, because I wanted something that was more than, you know, Frank and Smith and Associates, or Zuniga and Associates for that matter. I wanted something that was branded, that was conceptual, that was, when you read it, you knew what it is that I do. And I did that for about 6 years. And it was some very difficult 6 years. I started in 2007, 2008, Lehman Brothers happens. The whole economy around the world goes into the tank, and real estate was particularly affected. because of the lack of cash credit on the open market for new real estate development. But I survived and I actually thrived during that very difficult time. And I built and expanded my practice, which I later brought to Rimon, which was at the time a relatively small law firm, with the notion of it was a law firm that was based in the cloud, leveraging cloud technology and online services. Basically, we were doing Zoom before Zoom was really a thing. Maybe I exaggerate, but the notion was we were very early adopters of practicing law on a virtual platform, on a cloud-based platform. Didn't mean that we were a virtual law firm in the sense that we were fake or made up. We were an integrated law firm, but we were using technology to try and build cohesion and community in a way that was definitely not traditional. So I joined Rimon in 2013, and I stuck around, and my practice continued to grow and thrive. The firm continued to grow and thrive to the point where we were from 33 lawyers when I started to 80 to 100 to 150. And around the time that the pandemic begins, there's an interesting impact that happens on the legal services community at that point, which is, oh, guess what? We have to work from home. We have to work remotely. We have to leverage cloud-based technology to be able to service the clients during this difficult moment. And we in Rimon at that time had been doing this for a decade, right? I mean, this was our jam. And so around 2022, there was an event in which my partners who founded the firm came knocking on my door and asked me if I would be interested in taking over management. So we ended up having me become managing partner in 2022. And leadership is challenging. It changes you and it changes people around you. And so for me, at least, I don't want to say that I stumbled, but I certainly struggled quite a bit personally, interpersonally, dealing with the changes that come with leadership. I put down my law practice and I ended up becoming an administrator, a manager. Anyway, I've been doing that now for 4 years. We were talking about being comfortable in our own skin, right? I feel much more comfortable in the skin of this new version of me, from lawyer to manager to administrator to strategic planner to the person who executes the strategic plan. And that's kind of where I am right now. I didn't seek this out. This wasn't something that I was looking to do. But for what it's worth, Katy, it came at a point in my career when I was ready for it nonetheless, even though I didn't necessarily know I was ready for it. So there you have it.
I think that's very critical what you just ended with. There's so much to be said there. I want to go to the topic, but to just know that if you're listening to this, just even if you quit listening after this, which I encourage you not to do, but what he just said, what Juan said, not being ready for it, but saying yes and knowing that there's a reason why you're being tagged for that and that you are ready for it. And the discomfort that comes with that is where it's all at, because I get so many inquiries from lawyers that at the senior level that are kind of bored and tired, burnt out certainly, but they're looking for something to start to reimagine a future for themselves, right? And I think what you said in a couple of places in that intro, maybe I caught it last time, maybe I didn't, the 2007 Lehman Brothers, where you shifted, you said the real estate market took a dive, but you said you thrived. And so I'm guessing it's because, from what I remember, you pivoted. And the resilience that comes from just saying, okay, we're going to recreate and redo this. And then I think that's probably what they saw in you, where you have to be creative to run a firm this size in this manner where not everybody is together, and the nimbleness that has to come with it and the level of effective communication, I think, that has to come with it. And you step in and say, okay, I'll figure it out, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's, if you're listening, these are the things underneath what people that are successful are truly doing well, that sometimes they don't. I mean, I don't know. I think you flagged it for yourself. You were just weren't going to point it out, but I point it out because I think there's a lot of learning where sometimes people just skim over that stuff, but that's the heart of the foundation. So, before we got on, you said, well, I'm testing something out, and I really want to work with that today. The reason I wanted you back on the show is, in 2026, I'm on a mission with this problem that I see in law firms. And I was like, I wonder what Juan's got to say about this. I call it the problem that I've been diagnosing for years because I was part of it. But 2026 has heightened it, and I'll tell you why. And I want to set this up for you, Juan, and everybody else, because Juan hasn't heard this. I keep everything fresh. So bear with me. I call it the 2-1-2 effect. So at 211 degrees Fahrenheit, you get hot water, right? At 212, though, for those of you who are not science people, and I'm not a science person either, I'm a finance person, you have steam that's powerful enough to really move a locomotive, okay? So that's what I see in law firms. Senior level leaders are like this, their temperature rises over the years, kind of like mine did, 209, 210, 211. No one is noticing. Why is no one noticing? Because we're professionals. This is not quiet quitting. And this is also not, I was talking to someone at a major law firm, and they were like, oh, do you mean like the 80-year-old partner that won't leave? I'm like, no, I'm not talking about that or quiet quitting, which is really not of the legal industry, because as professionals, we're performing. We just stop seeing a future for ourselves. And suddenly that person hits 212 and they eject. They're gone. Okay. You have no idea what was coming. Management never saw it. The partner committee, who they're generally part of the partnership, don't see it coming because they didn't see them heating up. So here's the cost element. And I'm going to tell you why in 2026 it's become so bad. Every time that one senior level, you can call them an associate, but really the leader at some level and a senior level partner leaves, it hits the bottom line, the balance sheet at $1 million. It's attrition costs, search fees, and training, lost institutional knowledge, all that stuff that we know. But it's also the client relationships that we see that really hit that hard. Stalled strategic initiatives. People aren't showing up for certain things where they were in charge of something. So, and then when that happens, here's what I've always seen. Everything happens in threes, right? So that first person leaves, and 2 other senior lawyer leaders in that capacity quietly sit in the corner, and they start reevaluating their career. And again, they're performing, so no one can tell what's going on with them. There's no indicators that they're not performing. And they eject too. So now you've got $3 million. So that's why I call it the $3 million problem. And my solution has been the 3M solution, the company 3M that makes adhesives. Law firms used to be 10 years ago or more, a lot more sticky than they are now. So my solution is to bring that stickiness back to big law, or not even big law, honestly. Law firms at a lot of sizes suffer from this. And sometimes, I don't know, it hits different law firms differently, but certainly it's the $1 million problem. So that you're not going to lose that $3 million turnover is not even possible. And I was that person, and I ejected that fast. And sometimes, lawyers will say at law firms, we don't have that issue. And I'll say, well, I know 3 people or 4 or 5 that just call me out of the blue and have that conversation with me that they're not happy for a number of reasons. Some of them are more entrepreneurial. And I think this goes to what you brought to the table today, and that bureaucratization doesn't work for them because things aren't being institutionalized, they're being bureaucratized. And that is a Juan quote. And other people have different capacity problems there. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about. And here's why in 2026 it's so important. It's not getting better in 2026, and it's only Q1, but I forecast these things because I've dealt with it for so long. We've got instability in business globally because of
Mm.
what's going on in the world. And that lawyers are, well, I mean, look at, we're all a little bit more risk averse than the normal entrepreneur would be, right? So lawyers are that way. So that makes people very much contract in law firms and not strategize and from a business manner go into some level of like, uh-oh. And then AI adds a whole other layer, the technology instability with that. And in 2026, all this is really bubbling up, and law firms are losing people that they really can't afford to lose. This isn't normal turnover. These are people that go to one firm and then they still don't find that in one firm. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about. But I love the way you brought your portion of it to the table. And part of me wants you to just talk about what you're dealing with, and we'll bring the points together, I think. So, do you want to do that?
Sure, sure. A lot of what you just said, I don't know if it was PTSD, but let's just call it flashbacks to moments in my career where you're like, that's why I said earlier, you wake up one morning and you look at the mirror and you realize you're not happy. How many times does that happen in the career? But more important than that question is like, why should it ever happen? Um, and I think there's lots of layers packed into it. One layer is what have we chosen to do as a profession, right? When I go talk to law students, my sort of play acting is I tell them what we've chosen to do is we've picked up a big burlap sack of other people's problems and we throw it on our back and we carry it across the room. And when we put the sack down, we're supposed to solve people's problems. We make other people's problems our own. And that's a very demanding thing for someone to take on as a professional endeavor. And the other thing is the way so much of part of the practice of law, part of the way law firms are structured, part of the way law school is administered is it's really treated overwhelmingly like a zero-sum game. You're either the winner or you're the loser. And being the loser is not tolerated. There is no middle ground. Um, and so those are two very, very heavy stressors that we put on ourselves by choice. And then we insert ourselves into law firm environments. And then you've got the whole issue of how the law firm itself puts pressure on you. Client pressure is enough. But then law firm pressure is another level of things. And so what you do is, just like you're saying, you get to 209, 210, 211, and 212, and all of a sudden, like in the cartoon, the steam starts coming out your ears. Part of it is by choice, and part of it is by architecture. So the choice is what we decided to do in terms of becoming lawyers, and architecture is the type of organizations that we work in. And the way those organizations function is to put even more pressure on you to build time, to realize and not write off, and discount invoices to clients, to keep associates busy, to spend time, giving back to the firm and administrative non-billable hours, et cetera, et cetera. What we've decided to do is by architecture, create even more of a pressure cooker for lawyers. It doesn't surprise me. I lived it. And when I decided I couldn't see a happy face in the mirror staring back at me, for me, the issue that I had to grapple with is what am I going to do that is going to bring me happiness?
Mm.
I like what I do. I like the intellectual challenge. I like representing clients and taking that, bag off my shoulder and putting it down and say, we closed your transaction. This is a good day. And the client thanks you.
Mhm.
But how do you shift the architecture? What I decided to do was, Katy, I threw it all in. I walked away from big law. I opened my little branded boutique practice. Well, the thing I didn't say is I opened with 2 clients. I didn't have a steady source of revenue, and I had a leftover laptop that my old law firm let me keep because they'd already amortized the hell out of it and it had no value to them. And I realized when I got to my office, I didn't have a chair. Okay. I'm literally saying I didn't have a chair. I brought in a Costco plastic picnic table as my desk, and I had to go down the street to buy an office chair. So I was willing to throw it all in and bet on myself. But you were talking about risk averse. Not everyone is able to
Yeah.
do that. Internally, psychologically, that's a really, really kind of, there's the balance between risk taking, risk aversion, and recklessness. And I don't know if I was reckless or what, but I did it. I think the point that I'm trying to drive to some degree is that, look, if you decided to make this professional choice and it's not for you, you should think maybe about getting out and go becoming a consultant, going back to school, doing something. I know it's very easy to say and it's not practical when people have mortgages to pay and whatnot. But if the profession is not making you happy, you need to think about other ways of getting happiness. And if the problem, on the other hand, is the architecture in the firm that you're at is putting you even into more pressure, think about different ways to practice. And that's what I did. I just said, I'm going to do it on my own because I'm not happy. The guy staring back at me in the mirror is not happy. Once I started my practice, the guy staring back at me was very happy. He was freaked out because he didn't know what he was doing, but he was happy. It's like, this is my ship. I'm the captain. I'm going to sail it. If it crashes into the rocks, okay, at least I was the captain. I
So,
was willing to take that chance.
yes. So you and I are the black sheep for sure. When
Yeah,
I left practicing law, totally, I just left the career, right? And I did it because it was very personal. Every person is different. There's no judgment on what other lawyers are doing or what any professional is doing. I have a family member who is an anesthesiologist and she wants to do what I do. And I said, "Oh, I don't want to inspire you that way. Your husband, who's my cousin, will kill me." And she said, "I just don't want to be an anesthesiologist anymore. I don't want to
yeah,
live in the hospital's timeline." So no judgment. That said, though, there's a lot of lawyers. The majority of lawyers are not like you and me. And so for those of
yeah.
you listening, please don't listen to this and say, "Well, okay, congratulations, you two are brave. We're not. We're lacking, and woe is me." That's not the point of this dialogue at all. It's for you within the big firm setup, or whatever the size of the firm is, to see that if that structure is going to thrive, some things need to get a once over and looked at. And this morning, the partner that I was talking to from my old firm said, "Well, what's one thing you do to stem this?" And I said, really, the focus becomes relationships are broken at those levels. That's why we don't see a future for it for ourselves. We're not happy. And I'm not talking mushy woo. I'm not going to come in and hold hands. I'm a business person. But it's the communication aspect of it. The time management is always linked to communication, is always linked to relationships, and structurally looking at things a little differently and not rocking the boat too much, but giving options, looking at things, and then building each individual lawyer around their own brand, but to represent the firm brand, which is what I know you've got on your list these days, right? So not
Yeah.
to go rogue, but to know, hey, I have this brand for myself, these skill sets that I have, not associated with law, by the way, right? Everyone should be billing and good at what they do and providing good service. I have an origin story. I call it a personal connection story. I have these attributes to me. And what happens then, Juan, is what I found out, even in big firms, then people are like, "Oh, I don't need to leave now. I don't have to leave because now I can see who I am and I can fit in." Yet it has to be a process where people can go through that while they're billing, while they're busy. And then the ones that do want to leave, it's not a $1 million problem. What I found is because, yeah, they leave, but they give proper notice, or, I mean, I can't even tell you how many partner meetings people are like, "Oh my God, so and so walked in and announced he's leaving." And we said, "Can we talk about this? Is this a comp issue? You're so senior in the partnership ranks." And the person's like, "Yeah, no, no, I'm really done." Right.
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen. It doesn't hit the books at that level. And then, there are always going to be the yous and me's that leave because none of that is going to work for us. But I still believe we're in the minority. I do. And when we do leave, I don't want the impact of us leaving to be that big on the firms because turning those ships around takes time. And a lot of times people are like, well, we don't need to turn the ship around. I'm like, okay, well, then you're going to lose a lot of money out the door that with 2026, it's going to be hard to economically thrive. I'm not here to scare people. So, what of that are you working on in your structure? And maybe you want to explain the structure for people that are not familiar with your structure. I
Yeah.
think it's unique.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna comment on something that I was thinking of as you were talking there. Um, so I think I said earlier, I come out of law school in the early '90s. Um, I would submit that two things I want to comment on. One is that the way that we used to practice law, the way that we were told the type of law firms you needed to be at in terms of having a so-called prestigious career, a lot of that has shifted. There are different ways to practice what can be an incredibly rewarding and sophisticated practice for high quality clients who value your service and damn well pay you. Okay. Let's make sure that we need to get paid out of all of this.
Yes,
Um,
no one should be working for free.
Exactly. And I would submit Rimon as one of those different ways of practicing law that wasn't available 15 years ago. But there's other examples as well. And technology in the great measure has allowed us to have those opportunities available in the way that they weren't before. So I throw that out there. And the other thing I want to throw out there, Katy, is an emotion, a word that we don't talk about enough, and that's shame. Okay. So let's go back to when I started the career, right? It was you're a first year associate, you're working at, say, the California office of a New York law firm, and there's 6 or 7 or 8 or however many other first year associates in this incoming class with you. And they kind of set us up for competition. It's kind of like the Hunger Games or something like that, right? You look around the room on orientation day and you realize, in 2 years, half of these people are going to be gone. And the notion that surrounds that, there's shame around that because you don't want to be the one who didn't make the cut, that didn't get promoted, or who couldn't handle it and hit the ejector seat and went and worked in-house or went and worked for a regional law firm as opposed to a national law firm, right? There is this notion around the legal practice and prestige that I think creates shame on some people when they want to do something different. And again, you were calling you and me the black sheep. I didn't have shame when I went and opened my own office. I actually had a lot of pride, but I know there were a lot of people that were looking at me and saying, are you sure you want to do this? Are you a little crazy or what? And I think people in part pursue the so-called accepted path because to stray from it, there's shame associated with that until they get to the point where what you said, you hit 212, the steam blows out of your ears and you just decide to walk away to the point where even compensation is no longer worth the discussion of even sticking around anymore. But when you've gotten to that point, you've kind of gotten to the point where I'm exiting this option, but what am I going to do next, right? So instead of really having a thoughtful discussion with yourself about, I'm not happy, whether it's around compensation or stress or the quality of service or the kind of clients that I work for or who I have to report to or the billing structure and architecture of my firm. If you're not happy, don't wait till you get to 212 degrees, right? Start acknowledging it beforehand and start thinking about what is going to make you happy. But also note that in planning your exit, don't adopt shame as part of that decision. adopt something completely different, which is self-acceptance and pride, that you actually decide this is not for me. Just because people say this is the way, prestigious lawyers are supposed to behave and the kind of organizations are supposed to be in, you don't have to accept that. Accept what's right for you and ditch the shame, you know?
So I want to address that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Because listeners, Juan makes it sound so fluid and seamless. I just want to bring a little bit of reality back to it because he can do it so seamlessly. Uh, I concur with you 100%. I did have that shame when I left.
Yeah.
When I left the firm, I went in-house. So there's no shame there because every lawyer, this was back in early 2000, that was the dream. And when I stopped practicing, I had my entire identity rolled up into being a lawyer. And so there was shame there. And I'm an immigrant. And my mom said, what do I tell my friends you are if you're not a lawyer and all that? So it became very, very confusing for me. Now,
Yeah.
when I go into law firms and I work with those lawyers, this is not a plug, this is reality. We stem that. So if they are going to leave because we've developed that brand for them, then there is no shame on exit. There's a real collegial conversation that it's not the right fit. Here's where I'm going to go. And to your point about self-acceptance and pride instead of shame, it happens more. Then
Good.
see the lawyers though that leave those firms, senior level partner, not the name on the wall, right? But everyone else under it, right? The real $1 million problems that just go to another firm because they're promised something better. And the same problem
Yeah.
happens. And sometimes they even come back. I've known people that'll come back and then leave again. So that is, to your point, people are people, I really mean it. It's the human element of, I don't want to take the time or I'm afraid to look at why am I unhappy? And that becomes an existential question, and we can get into the woo-woo on that, whatnot, but it still is a business problem, and it still is a problem within the legal profession, and we can actually talk about any other profession, like I said earlier, medical. But how do we develop people so that they will stop and focus on not just going to another firm because they have that mortgage, because they have 3 kids in Ivy League and they have to pay for it? How do we get them to, they don't have to be wired like you and me. And I'm not saying we're better. I'm truly not. This was a very painful process I went through, and I'm not sure I've become the butterfly yet. It's a work in progress constantly, and don't know about you, Juan. But how do we get people to be courageous enough to stop and exhale and go, hey, early on, I want this to work here at this firm because I like being in this global firm. I like being in the New York office or whatever, the California office of the global New York-based firm. And choosing to look at things differently without taking the route you and I did. And not saying it's good or bad, but because those are the norms and you and I think from an exception place, perhaps a little more broadly, we see the bigger picture differently. Perhaps we can bring some thought to that. Because you can't hire everyone at Rimon. And maybe that's your goal. Maybe I shouldn't say that. It's just realistically, you can't have everyone in your firm because the business of law doesn't work that way. We can't have that kind of monopoly.
Yeah, wow, that's a really hard question because, and maybe I'm too tainted from personal experience because, even though I didn't hit 212, I did hit the ejector button, right?
Yeah, we were
Um,
close.
and the ejector button for me was to go do my own thing as a solo boutique practitioner. Um, I I think that something that really drives frustration in the practice, and I'm anticipating that this is the kind of thing that drives frustration more in the larger law firm context, is the lack of agency, the lack of autonomy, the
Yes.
lack of feeling that you are in control of your professional life. Because when you work for a larger organization, right, there is um, expectation of what you're going to do for the organization,
Yes.
um, and the organization's clients. And some of the bigger law firms um, actually disincentivize you to be autonomous and entrepreneurial with respect to your own practice and your base of clients. And so if you do like that, prestigious big law type of environment in which to practice, I think what you need to do if you're unhappy where you're at is to do your research to find the kind of law firm that is going to provide you rewards for being who you are in terms of wanting that agency and wanting that autonomy.
Now,
Um, and I
now,
don't think it's impossible to find that. I think some firms do definitely reward you for being, an originator with respect to your clients who wants to do the work for those clients instead of the law firm that says, no, we represent, these top 25 clients and you're only going to work on their engagement matters.
okay, so are you saying that's one thing to look for? Because I'm looking for
Yep.
possible, okay, all right, so that's,
Yep.
what about though? Let's flip and talk to the people running those larger firms, or
Yep.
used to be. How could they be looking at this differently? And I think this goes to what you're mulling over for the firm yourself, right? Institutionalization without making it a bureaucracy so that, let me see, I'm looking at your fantastic, this a structural concept where there's a process there, and everyone is part of that. But I mean, how can we talk to the managing partners of those global firms or the global management committees? Well, maybe we should just talk about what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
That'll plant
Yeah.
seeds for them.
Yeah, I was going to do that. So my organization, my law firm is in um, that kind of awkward stage where you come out of being, in our case, the law firm equivalent of an emerging company.
Okay.
And as you grow, right, and you've grown and you're happy with your growth, I can say we're a full service nationwide law firm. We practice in 30, 40 different areas of law. We're in so many cities in the United States. I can say all of these great things. But when you get to that moment, there is a moment for everybody in every company, in every organization, in which growth requires you to change certain behaviors because the behaviors that served you when you were an emerging company no longer serve you today. The founder can't keep everything in their head anymore. You need to establish processes and consistencies that drive efficiencies. There's a difference between that and bureaucracy, okay? But the notion is to be able to start to scale, you need to do things differently. You need to grow and evolve. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to have an organization that can't keep up with its needs. And then if you're talking about my lawyers not getting the kind of service that they need, then they're going to hit the ejector seat because they're just going to say, Rimon's too big and it's not working for me now. And so that's a transformational moment that I'm in right now that was part of your and my email exchange this morning. That's something I'd like to explore further. But going back to your other question about what managing partners can do, there's another inflection point that I think is happening right now in the legal industry is if you're and I've heard this from managing partners and business development directors at AmLaw 100 firms, they're looking around and saying, well, how do we distinguish ourselves from the pack, right? Let's just say you're AmLaw number 73. And how do you distinguish yourself between, that peer set of AmLaw 50 to 125? You're in the middle of that. And it's kind of like you're fungible with respect to all of these other firms in that space. How are you going to break out? And one of the things that's happening at the big law level, as you can tell, Katy, is there's a lot of merger activity going on, which means that people feel that what they've got isn't working, or economically it's falling apart because some, 9 partners hit the ejector button in the example that you were giving early, and all of a sudden, the firm's no longer financially viable. It needs to find an acquirer partner, or
Yes.
you're that acquirer partner and you're trying to fill in, key practice areas or key geographies to get you to the next level, to break out of the middle of the AmLaw to get to the AmLaw 50. And all of those decisions require management to focus on certain kinds of economics, which have a counter impact, I believe, of turning off partners in certain practice areas. So there are industry drivers right now that I think are also transforming the legal profession at the highest level. And when I mean the highest level, I mean, the largest law firms in the country and the largest law firms in the world. And so, I mean, I'll give you an example. There is a partner that joined us pretty recently, and he had been at his firm for 2 decades. And he said to me, when I joined the firm, I was one of 40 lawyers in my practice group. I look around today in 2026, and he says, I'm one of 4 left. What that tells me is the law firm is no longer interested in developing my practice group anymore, because they're moving in other directions, because the legal industry, they feel, is requiring them to move in other directions.
Trends
People
are
are reacting because of FOMO, right? Fear of missing out.
yes.
So I don't know how to advise those managing partners. I'm not in that situation. What I do know is that when lawyers are not happy, they will make decisions based on the fact that they're not happy. And it's really hard to exit a firm like that where you've got a regular draw. And when you participate in some level of equity profits, assuming you do, and even though you might feel that economically you're being treated unfairly, you're not the black sheep like Katy and Juan, who are willing to, go set up something that's completely outside the box. That's a really hard position to be in. I don't have any judgment for people that stay in that position, but if I'm the managing partners in those situations, I want to make sure that at least I've got a strategy that lets those people know that there is a place for them,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
That they're valued, right?
And that I think is the sweet spot based on what you're working through, which is around having things institutionalized. Because, like you very basically said, can't keep it all in your head anymore, people. And people need to have a path to follow, because most of us lawyers don't want to be business owners, don't want to be entrepreneurs. We signed up to be lawyers and to service a client, and then to have the support staff taken care of, the coffee taken care of, whatever, right? Like that's not my job, right? But having that harmony where things are in a process orientation that shows that there's a bigger picture, yet lets everyone feel heard and seen. Because I can't tell you
Yeah.
how many exit interviews I do where, I mean, I know the answer, but I'm obligated to ask, hey, so and so, you were made equity partner and blah, blah, blah. And so is it the money? No, it was never the money. It was just that every time at these partner meetings, every time I said something, no one saw me, no one heard me. And this is not a gender issue. This is not, some of you guys who are listening as women lawyers or male lawyers maybe think, oh, it's the women that, no, no, sincerely, this is just, I don't know if I belong here anymore. So, and I'm not going diversity, whatnot. I'm just saying there's a unity concept that's not about diversity or about gender. That's to your point where people feel like, hey, if I stay and if I do my part, like there's a place where I can be heard. And the way I bring that is through the brand, right? Like, hey, you have a brand here, and it can't go rogue from Ramon's brand because why? Why? Because you work here. You do get those benefits, and there's a consistency, continuity, congruity that
Yeah.
clients are attracted to. However, if you have something about you, which I call the weirdness also, a lot of well-established corporate clients will pay good money for someone with good pedigree who has a little bit of an edge and a weirdness to them because they think that's refreshing in this day and age. And if the kind of clients that you want, they're smart enough to be able to distinguish this guy's not stuffy, and just because he's funny and he likes to decipher license plates. I don't know, I'm making up stuff. So there has to be that harmony, because I think you said that really well in your email, because it cannot be based on the reputation and the business of a set number of partners. Yet everyone needs to feel like they can do their version of that without jumping out of that institutionalization. Am I saying that effectively, Juan?
No, I think you are. And I think, there's also law firms are like any other kind of organization, right? Um, in the sense that the organization is going to thrive if the members of that community really want to, because of their own internal dynamics and volunteer and volition, really want to give back to the organization.
Yes.
So, yet as a manager, what you need to do is find ways to encourage that volition amongst your partners, amongst your lawyers, to give back to the firm. Giving back to the firm is too often just what's the bottom line,
Yes.
right? But to be able to give back to the firm in other ways, in more intangible ways, you as the producer, as the individual lawyer, need to feel valued, that your voice is heard, that there's a place for you. I would submit that part of that is economic, part of it is emotional, and part of what happens when you get to 212 is probably a mix of both, right? You just feel that I'm not appreciated, and that's being obviously demonstrated in my compensation, but also not appreciated because there's ways that I'm trying to contribute back to the organization that I can tell other people don't value.
Yes.
Um, and so at the management, at the leadership level, there could be different ways that you could value people. There could be ways of tweaking economic formula. There could be ways so that, like when you were saying, someone's in the partnership meeting and they speak up and, actually listen to what they're saying, and stress test it. I mean, even though if you stress test what someone says and it turns out, okay, that doesn't fit and work, the fact that you stress tested it meant that you were giving that voice, again, agency, importance.
Yeah.
And, people want that.
Yeah.
People want a sense of being, contributors.
At every level, people I think in big law or any size law where there's a grouping larger than, small, whatever. I don't know. My numbers aren't making sense, but I think everybody gets it. That everyone is a cog. And I just don't think that that's giving, it's not fair, I think. And so I think you're doing that well. I want to ask you what you're doing around that, but it brings me back to Project Aristotle. Have you heard of Project Aristotle?
No.
Google did Project Aristotle years ago, I want to say a decade ago. They were trying to figure out how to make effective teams. And so they researched it, and it was called Project Aristotle. And they came down to understanding that it was about safety. So that if I'm sitting, say, in a partners meeting, and I
Okay.
feel like I belong and and I have agency and autonomy over my voice, male, female, then I will speak up and go, hey, I have this idea, or to this point about comp review. And people don't have to agree with me, but I am safe enough to say it, right? So my steam doesn't build up to 212. So that at
Yeah.
190, I've said my piece. People didn't listen, but they said, that's interesting. Say more about that, right? That's why this all goes back to relationship and communication building is what I do in these firm structures, right? Because
Yeah.
like, this is the key language. Say it, but don't just say it, mean it, sit there. Patience, right? So I believe that becomes an important part of this. Now, what are you doing about it? And I know we're running out of time. You and I could talk for hours, but I think it's only
Have plenty of time. We can talk for hours if you want. My only limitation these days is I still have 22 hours of CLE that I need to do in 3 weeks, but that's my problem. So what am I doing about it? I'm gonna confess something to you, which is that I mean, I had been a leader before. Like I said, I ran my own law firm and I had, attorneys that worked under me. But transitioning into management of a pre-existing organization, which is what I did in 2022 here at Rimon, is a very, very different type of leadership. And um, my confession to you is that maybe one of the most effective things that I did in terms of doing what you're saying here, right? Giving agency and letting other people being heard and giving voice to my partners. What I needed to do was let go of taking it personally, let go of having to be liked, and let go of having to satisfy everybody. Those were really, really three hard things that I needed to do because I realized eventually that those three things were part of what I liked being a lawyer. Because I could get satisfaction of all of those things when we got to closing on a transaction that was really complicated, took a lot of time, a lot of energy. But when you do that thing, the client tells you, wow, great. You get all of that kind of, I'm liked, I'm loved, everyone's happy, blah, blah, blah. But in leadership of a transforming organization, you kind of got to let go of a lot of that stuff so that you can be open to actually hearing people. Okay. And when you hear people, you don't have to be liked, but you do have to listen. You don't have to take it personally, just the fact that they're criticizing the way something's being done and you were the person who created that process. You don't have to take it personally. Listen, maybe there's a better way of doing it. And you don't have to make everybody happy. You can tell that person, okay, I'm listening to what you're saying, but we're not going to do what you want. And they might not understand why. You might know the reason why is because it's better for the larger organization that we don't do that. It might be better for you, the individual who's proposing it to me, but I can't make all of my decisions based on everyone's individual needs. An organization just doesn't function that way. Notwithstanding all of that, you can still give that person voice and you can still let them be heard and feel valued, but you've got to disassociate all the personal stuff from that to be a good leader. And that is really hard. I got to confess to you, Katy, it took me quite a while to get there.
It is.
Um,
It is. And everything you say is the gem solution, sincerely, that I believe in. And, my question is going to be to the person listening, going, oh, sure, you have that personality, Juan, and Katy too, whatever. I'll throw myself in that with you. Juan, you can do it, even though you're saying it's hard. I can't do that because that's not my personality. What do you say to people when they say stuff like that?
well, you gotta let go of the fact that you think it's not your personality. There's a part in every lawyer that knows that part of what we do is performance art. Um, and in that sense, we're playing a role to some degree as a manager, as an administrator, as a leader. I'm playing a role, right? There's a part of me that you can say, sure, it's authentic or whatever. Um, but you can have authenticity and not play the right role. There could be authenticity that doesn't get you what you want. So you could say, it's hard for me to do that. Don't accept the notion that, oh, that's not part of my personality or I can't do that. Recognize what you need to do and then start working on yourself to do it and overcome what you think are your limitations.
There you go.
Um,
Well
I
said.
don't, yeah, yeah. So I don't buy that. Maybe that you don't want to do it because you're not comfortable and you don't like doing it. But if
That's
you're the leader, you have no choice.
That's the key. In the interest of time, it's the discomfort level of doing something
Yeah,
differently. But look, I look at it this way when I talk to managing partners. I'm like, the choice is it either people leave around you and the balance sheet reflects it so wildly that you have to make an uncomfortable decision and you're not in control of it, or these little uncomfortable steps that you can stay in control of. And since Juan, usually I like to do a part two, but we kind of blended part one and part two, where I say bring your biggest challenge. I feel like part of this, as you're saying, you're working through it. Is this letting go of taking it personally, being liked? Is one of my solutions is teaching clients to hold tension, which means
Sure.
just, say it, zip your mouth, and just sit in the discomfort of the tension of the silence of it and let it land for people. And that means you don't have to explain it, justify it, like it's a statement. Maybe it's just the word no. And the tension is where we practice owning it, right? And that's what really great leaders do anywhere. And so I say that's one of the tools I use and I teach around, okay, discomfort requires tension. And
Sure, sure. And that goes to the third factor that I was talking about. You can't make everyone happy,
oh,
which means that there's going to be tension because you're going to make a decision that someone is not happy with.
yes.
You have to know as the leader that you're making that decision for the benefit of the organization as a whole. And the organization will be better off because of that, regardless of the tension.
So all these things you're running through with your organization as it's shifting, how do you stay in tune? And that'll be my final question in the interest of time. How do you stay in tune to that this is the best for the organization, even though not everyone's going to like it as we grow and as you shift and institutionalize without having a bureaucracy?
Um, I think there's a couple of factors, right? One is, like you said, be ready to accept the tension when it comes. But the other thing is, you really have to be open-ended to stress testing your own assumptions. Maybe you come up with a plan or a strategy for growth, or changing certain processes to make them more efficient. Do not hold on to the emotional outcome of thinking that you have to be right. If we're coming up with a process or a strategic plan that turns out after 18 months is not working, you got to be open to letting it go and pivoting. Um, and it's funny because, again, when we're lawyers, sometimes we think it's a zero-sum game. And if people aren't going to accept my proposal or my solution, then I didn't win, I lost. You got to let go of that, because sometimes the organization itself will tell you that that's not the right way to do it, that if you continue down this path, you might actually blow a whole bunch of people past 212 degrees, and that's not what you wanted to do.
Exactly.
Um, so yeah, you got to be open to changing if the circumstances require, I'd say. There's a
I,
bit of humility related to that. And I think as a leader, adopting some level of humility is important, because when you get caught up in the pride of being a leader, you will lose the ability to shift when circumstances require. If you have some level of humility, you can say, you know what? I didn't get that right. It's okay. Let's try a different direction.
I mean, I can't figure out a better way to end this podcast than with that. This concept really of not to be right is very challenging.
Yeah.
And yet, when I meet with clients, I'm always like, they're like, well, I always make sure people know I'm not here with your answers, right? I am here to ask you provocative questions that make you uncomfortable enough so that you shift your perspective and get an insight that's going to be your $1 billion insight, right? And that requires me not to be wedded to the right answer. It's my question that I'm asking you, and you can say, no, Katy, that doesn't work that way for me. And I'll be like, okay, cool. Well, let me ask it a different way. Let me ask a different
Yeah.
question. Let me provoke your thinking this way. This happened with this client situation. So that for me requires humility. Now I'm giving you my version of it. So what you heard Juan say is about letting go of taking it personally, being like satisfying everyone and open to hearing people out, which all goes to this tense conversation of holding tension in the room, and being willing to stress test stuff and being open to not being right, because there's a humility to all of this. Now, if you're thinking, how do I parse through that? It really is just sitting with it. Sitting with it when you're driving home, when you're in the shower, when you're taking the dog for a walk, and reflecting on what that would look like for you if you made little tiny steps in that direction while getting feedback. Feedback is critically important because that's how course corrections happen in the world. So Juan, I'm going to give you the last word. Is there anything else you want to ask? You want to leave the audience with any burning question for me that I could have coached you through, but we didn't this time? Tell me.
Well, yeah, okay, sure. I'm going to ask a favor of you.
Yes.
I would like to have a discussion, and maybe it would be maybe a panel discussion about helping me with my problem, which is law firms in transition. Um, and what I was alluding to before, the notion of the law firm coming out of its phase of an emerging company and
Mhm.
maturing and having to transform, because it gets into some of the stuff we were talking about just a second ago, right? If I need to make changes and transform, um, how do you how do you figure that out? I swear to God, I feel like I'm trying to figure this puzzle out every single day, and there's 10,000 different things that you need to do to keep an organization running, much less trying to get it to move into another direction. So I'd love to have a much bigger deep dive on that. And it can include people who are, say, we're adding new practice areas. We used to be a litigation shop. How do we like transform when we bring in corporate partners, or growing into different geographies? We decided to open an office in whatever, or we merged with another firm and the culture is not working out. Transitions. I want to talk about transitions.
Got it. All right, that's on the list for next time, unless we do a panel,
Woo!
maybe we can still do a panel. And I love the fact that you're thinking about these things. They're very, very, well, they're key, really, and people don't make the time. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
And Juan's not saying he's got all the answers, but he knows who he is and he knows the questions that he has, and he's not afraid to ask them because somewhere along the way there's going to be insight that's going to allow him to formulate the next steps. And so nowhere did I say you have to have a solution in that sentence, right, Juan? I said next steps because we're always iterating, and that's how magic
yeah,
is.
yeah,
So
exactly.
thank you for being a guest again. Thank you for giving me your time. I know it's a very precious thing, and thank you for bringing your wisdom, but also your honesty about not having it all figured out. It is so, it's not just endearing, it's inspiring as a leader to not have all the answers and say, yet I'm still the leader and I know what I'm doing. And that really is, there's a harmony there that I hope people can see Juan role modeling perfectly, really. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you for having me, Katy. It's a pleasure. It's always been a pleasure.
Always. All right. So this rounds out this episode of my podcast. And in the show notes, you will find snippets and details and solutions that we talked about. And one, if they need to, if they're interested, they don't need to. If they want to learn more about your law firm or you, where would you like us to send our listeners?
Send them to www.rimonlaw.com.
All right. That's where we'll send them. And until next time, Katy G out.